joining the CCLS Nigeria event. I think so, for their recording. Oh, okay. So I think someone needs to mute. Okay, so we'll kick off the event now. Thank you all for joining. We are here to discuss looking forward, um, seizing opportunities and mitigating risk in 2025. We have our able moderator, Tolu. I think everybody, the moderator and the speaker, will just introduce themselves just to save time. Thank you very much.
I hereby deliver opening remarks. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, or perhaps evening, I think. Hopefully, this will be an insightful discussion. We'll get to learn more about 2025, even though it's already looking gloomy, right? Well, thank you very much. On behalf of my partners and the management of Stren and Blan partners, we are delighted to have you here. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. We will get straight into it. I will introduce myself, and then I'll let moderators introduce themselves. So just tell us about yourself, what you do. My name is Tolulope. I currently head the legal and compliance team at Branch International. It's a fintech operating out of Nigeria, Kenya, India, and the US.
Hello, my name is Chioma, Olibie. I currently head the Legal and Compliance function of Africa Plus Partners. It's an infrastructure asset management company.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Martins Okundia, and I'm the General Counsel at Run Merchant Bank.
Dipo Okuribido, I'm General Counsel Commercial at Verod Capital.
Once again, hello. My name is Amala. I'm a partner here at Stren and Blan Partners. I do dispute resolution. Thank you.
Okay, I'll hold on to the mic. Okay, so we are discussing looking into 2025. We don't have, I'm hoping that my panelists have crystal balls and they will be telling us what the opportunities are, how to prepare, whether you're practicing in house or you are in private practice. The idea is that, we get to learn from one another here, your experiences through 2024, how to prepare for 2025, how to seize the opportunities, and that's what we'll be discussing. But I think just before we get started into 2025, it might be worth just, looking back, right, into 2024. I will just ask maybe Jennifer to talk about what were like the significant events that, occurred in 2024, how that sort of impacted your work as GC, how you've seen, some of these events. So, and I don't want to limit you by mentioning anything specifically, right? But how you think that impacted the kind of work you did this year as the GC of Rand Mutamba.
So I mean, I think that there's been a lot of socio-political events that have occurred during the course of the year. So in particular, I mean, we can speak about the very recent one, the COP29 that, has just ended, and that really centers around climate change. That's one event that, centered around just how, how people get affected, how people will be affected by, financing options. So in particular, one of the things that came out to me from the COP29 was the fact that there are a lot of considerations in relation to developing economies and just financing developing economies to be able to prevent climate disasters. So I think that what is being discussed, or what was discussed, was relating to just increasing financing for developing economies. So I think what was also considered was tripling the financing to developing economies from like $100 billion to $300 billion. So these are avenues essentially that would help as we go along. Something else that jumped out at me was also the possibility of also increasing this financing to like 1.3 trillion by 2035, I think it was. So again, there's been a lot of political changes as well. Now, in recent times, we see the US elections and how Donald Trump has, just won the presidential election. Now, there's a lot of impact in terms of that on its own. I mean, it's early days, so we can't really start to say what we expect or what we do not expect. But when you look at his manifesto, his proposals, you find that there's a lot of impact. And I think it's been in the news in recent times as well. One is particularly in relation to tax cuts. There's also import tariffs. So, and I think that's a very big issue, to be quite candid, because what Trump is trying to propose, or what he's proposing to do early next year, is that any goods coming into the US would have a higher tariff. Now, the idea is that China will be most hit, but again, it's going to trickle down to all the different economies, including ours. And so what that means is that there's going to be a lot more inflationary pressure on all the economies, more than what we're seeing right now. There's also the fact that Trump is also thinking about, more fracking, more drilling, and so that would impact, again, on the cost of oil. Is it going to impact on us negatively or positively? There are different school of thoughts, particularly because Dangote has come into the picture. So again, those are some of the big issues. There's also, the Ukraine crisis that.
Let's put stop on it, because we're gonna go into that. But Dipo, I think, speaking on behalf of yourself and maybe Chioma, just to go from like the private capital fund sector of this, what have you seen in 2024? How has this impacted, like, for example, legal services, or even like deals that you have done?
Legal services is a bit more complicated, but maybe everything's connected, maybe not. I think just thinking about the question, looking back 2024, probably the highlight, and it probably will feel like a convenient one, was in Q1, just that initial slide of the Naira, and a lot of things are connected to it. I think we knew, so changing administration to the Tinubu government, that there would probably be a step change in FX policy. And with the appointment of Cardoso to the central bank, there was a sense that there will be a return to orthodoxy. And, in the initial months in 2023, there was obviously that big jump. We ended the year around, I think, 1,050. And it sort of felt like, well, the jumps happened, okay, reset, and then we can, push on from here, which is how it had historically been a couple of times. But then, in the start of the new year, things then seemed like they were getting out of hand. And, it went 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, 1-5. It went as high as 1-8 at the time. People were then going around talking about, we are looking at 2,000 by April. Remember that specifically, there are lots of people saying 2,000 by April, and that affected everything. Yeah. And I think we had deals that we were negotiating, that we had deals that we were on the verge of closing in December, where it looked like we were talking about a 1,000 Naira exchange rate. Before we could get regulatory approvals, all of a sudden we are talking 1.5. But also, Nigeria, everything's linked, right? So that exchange rate then fell, inflation, obviously they had deregulated somewhat, so that exchange rate trickled down. into, which then meant that on a macro level in general, prices were sky high. Consumers were being squeezed. So obviously it affected deals because exchange rate changed on deals, but it also affected the market. I mean, for a while now, there's been that pullback of the idea of Africa rising, and everybody sort of understands that the middle class is shrinking. But in that Q1, it just really felt like that it was accelerating that shrink, and that kind of changed everything. It affected the kinds of businesses that we can look at. It affected how even external investors look at the market. There was probably a 1 to 2 month window where I know investors were asking their fund managers, well, please, almost don't invest. I mean, it's the irony, right? You plan somebody to invest, and then you're thinking, actually, maybe wait, don't invest. And that's just trickled down. And I think that's colored the whole of 2024. Hopefully, we don't have that kind of shock going into 2025.
I think we can only hope, and you sort of really described how. I can imagine you going on investor calls and then your LPs and them asking you how do you are you able to deploy whatever capital you planned to deploy this year? And I think that brings me to you, just even in terms of what Dipo has described and what Jennifer has even talked about in terms of all of these things. And for your practice, how was 2020?
Disastrous. Yes. I mean, obviously, unlike most persons that have spoken now on the other side, right, which is where we then represent clients. Now, if your clients, when you go for meetings, whether it's transactions or whether you're trying to resolve disputes, and the first thing you notice is that they're not smiling. And then they are giving you bad news, telling you, that you have to cut down on your fees, you have to, then, it's a problem, right? To be honest, one funny thing is that when we did our retreat for 2024, we had a gentleman from one of the people talk to us. And, well, I wouldn't want to say had a crystal ball, because if you looked at it, it was going to happen. But he had told us that, look, you probably need to invest more in representing more foreign corporates than looking at the Nigerian market, simply because you can then benefit from what's going on. I say disastrous not because the legal services environment has been tough, but disastrous because the corporates that we're representing are feeling it, right? Especially those in Nigeria. So I was having a discussion with some MDs yesterday or the day before yesterday. And one of the things they were telling me was that, look, Amala, we are making sales. In fact, we're actually doing very well, right? But these are foreign-owned entities, and you have to talk to your shareholders, and your shareholders don't talk in Naira, they talk in USD or in Euros. And then you've had a 15-20% margin, or even 30% margin in terms of your sales, which is very well. You would expect a fat bonus, but then you do the conversion in FX and all that, and then suddenly you then find that you are making a loss all of a sudden. Most of the big corporates now are going into things that traditionally you don't see big corporates do, CPs, right? Raising private notes, and that's because everybody is trying to survive. So how has it been for us? Not so good, right? Even for some of us who are business owners, and I do have some of my colleagues here, so I'm very careful to do that. We're getting a lot of, we're getting pushback from the clients who are telling us, well, Amala, you need to look at your timesheet, you need to look at that. I had a nasty discussion with my clients over a very ridiculous amount. I guess it was because of the fact that they were feeling the pressure. But then you also talk to your colleagues, and they're also giving you serious pressure that, our take-home is only taking us to 10 mainland bridge. Particularly, I had a discussion, one of them is on this table. I had a discussion, because we do from time to time, we get feedback from them. And it was consistent that, and by the way, my firm is one of those that they say, I'm told, the market says, that probably one of the highest paid. And so if that is so, and we're getting that complaint, I then imagine what is going on for some other business owners in terms of law firms. So it's tough all around. Even the strategy you think that you want to diversify and look more offshore, it's also tough. Because the investors are saying, look, come to Nigeria. Nigeria is a place to invest. You know, you're lying to the person. That's the reality, right? Because you look at it from an ease of doing business perspective to the greatest issue, which is FX. Say somebody has $5 million to invest, and the person puts it on the table, brings it into Nigeria. The person wants to repatriate 2 years down the line, and then it's devalued. He probably is repatriating losses, right? So it's tough. We're only hoping. I think what we are trying to do this year is to survive, right? To survive. I think Nigerians were quite resilient. We're always able to adapt. Fela, I think, aptly captured that when he talked about suffering and smiling, right? So
you don't look like you're suffering. I
think at the end of the day, just to end my boring speech, I think at the end of the day we'll survive, come up with innovative strategies. I think for the legal services, what we've done and what I encourage people to do is to look at areas that traditionally we may not want to invest in, but because of the sort of realities that we're seeing ourselves in, that has become a bit of an area that there are more and more issues coming out, right? So what I would say for people in the professional services businesses is maybe don't look at traditional areas, look at areas that react to what, so everybody on this table, especially for the corporates, would realize if you have financial services, you are just having a discussion of that, there is increased regulatory oversight. I think one of us, when we were having a discussion.
It sounds like you're already going into where we are going.
Okay, right, sorry.
So let's come back to that. Chioma.
Okay, yeah. So for me, I think everybody on the table has actually echoed biggest thing in 2024, which is the macro.
Yeah.
It's impacting everything from even how we look at investments, how the investments are performing, what generally the market feel is. So for example, because of what happened, the CBN also trying to deal with the inflationary pressures. We've had MPC rates increased for 6 consecutive times. We're now at 27.5. We don't know if it's going to continue to go up. Each time it goes up, you get a note from your bankers, your interest rate is going up if you have a Naira facility. So forget even dollars now. If you have a Naira facility, each time the rate goes up, you're getting a note from your bankers. You're looking at your books. How am I going to pay this off? So the macros have been the big impact from foreign exchange to just general performance of companies. So everyone has just really been on survival mode.
Was a bit more positive.
Yeah, going to 2025.
Yeah, I think we're actually coming out of a lot of all these issues.
I think we hear what's happening.
Yeah, I think we're actually coming out of a number of them. Not that well, we don't have that crystal ball, but it's sort of important to know that these things are cyclical.
Yeah.
Right. So from time to time we go through this type of phase. We never really experience it this tough.
Was 2016 is bad. I think 2016 is kind of like the closest and compared to where there was the old devaluation, where there was the FX crisis.
Two big differences in 2016. The first one is that there was one jump, not two. There were two jumps. But I think maybe perhaps more critically, in 2016 we were still 2016 is part of why we're here, because they didn't deregulate, so there was still a lot of artificial shoring up of the system. So because they didn't deregulate, all of that effects, it affected some business, but it didn't necessarily affect the broader economy, which then meant that CBN wasn't under pressure to increase rates. So it looked like we were fine, but really we were kicking the can down. So
but I think it will probably get better as we get into 2025. But again, like you say, the macros is always the macros, right? The macros clearly are not so positive in that way, but there's some things that we can sort of hinge on say there's possibility of some respite, at the end of the day. So I think that gives us some form of comfort and investors comfort as well.
So let's drill down into this, going into 2025. I think, and I'll start with Jennifer. What are the things that you think have happened or will happen, or that's already happened in 2024 that you think is going to make a difference? That's going to make a difference in 2025. That's going to impact the economy. That we should also start to bear in mind, either as a leader within the legal group of a financial institution, or a corporate internally, or is a legal person in a law firm.
So, I mean, I think there are quite a number of things to sort of consider, whether from just a people perspective or, like we say, the macros, how it impacts on businesses, the possibility of getting credits to be able to do business, generally how it affects everyone, right? I think as legal advisors in our various organizations, whether it's in-house or in law firms, what's extremely important is just following the trend, knowing what is happening part-time, and again, upskilling, reskilling, trying to be innovative, so that you can deal with whatever circumstance is coming, our way. Because if you think about it, the 2024 issues that, we're talking about, a number of these things, many corporates were able to somehow get over the line. There were some corporates, that didn't make it to this time, right? Because again, a lot of people went under, a lot of companies went under. But I suspect that the reason why some corporates were able to stay afloat is because they were able to re-strategize, they were able to be innovative, and that kind of kept them afloat. So really, I think that's what it is really. Just on learning things, learning new things, new ways to live, new ways to do business. Just looking at different sectors, what are the opportunities? I think Amala mentioned the fact that a lot of corporates are considering CPs, for instance, in terms of raising funds. In time past, you probably would just walk into a bank and get commercial rates. Because you're such a big entity, it's easy for you to get access to funds. But that changed. Big corporates, whether it is trade finance, trying to get dollars, at some point, there was just that cap. It was difficult for you to even get anything. And so companies needed to re-strategize, needed to start to upskill, reskill, think of what to do next. And that's what kept them afloat.
Dipo.
First, I mean, I see this. I see CPs quite different. I think a lot of people that are raising CPs, the rates are very high. MTN is raising, MTN that is after federal government, or maybe even before, they are raising at 27 for short-term issuance. So it's high, and I think I was chatting with somebody the other day. A lot of people are doing. We need to stay afloat. So we don't know how we're going to pay it, but we'll raise it now to stay afloat. And when hopefully conditions will improve, rates will come down, we can refinance.
No, but compared to commercial rates.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Because banks are doing 36%.
Exactly.
But I think I'm optimistic. I mean, partly because as an investor in the market, you have to be optimistic. But also, I think there's a couple of trends, and perhaps all tied conveniently to the very exciting election in the US. But in fairness, that election, a lot of people have been saying, is part of a broader trend. So I think the thing that makes me quite excited is in America in particular, maybe because the new president articulates it so clearly, or across a lot of the more developed markets, there's an anti-immigration push.
Yeah.
There's an anti-immigration push. Then America specifically, there's now this tariff war coming. I think those two things, maybe initially they sound bad, but they should theoretically, going out on a limb, because obviously they're all predictable, but they maybe potentially have promise for Nigeria. I think the hostility to immigration maybe means that we might see a reverse japa, or at the minimum, perhaps more limited jackpot. Rules have changed in the UK.
Yeah.
And you imagine that things will get tighter in the US. I bet that they probably pull Dropbox in another couple of months.
Correct.
But in general, it's not just there. In Canada, the prime minister is struggling, and I mean, he will either pull back significantly or the person that replaces him will. It's a trend across. That trend should mean that there's less opportunities for people to escape. Less opportunities for people to escape means more human resource in Nigeria, which is theoretically one of our biggest trends, but also more people chasing the jobs that maybe eases the pressure for employers, because if you are demanding too much, there's other guys that queue up for. But so I think there's it's another thing, but there's some promise in that. I think Nigeria suffered a lot from that immigration, and at the minimum, if more people stay back, there's potentially some good at a macro level from that. I think also, if assuming they go through the tariffs, even if not, probably the threat is enough. One thing that's likely to come out of it is, I think, like some other things, the global economy, vacuums don't exactly exist there. So the sense is that if there's all this protectionist focus from the US and maybe some other markets similar to it, can't think of too many, but it might then force, like the Chinese have to avoid the tariffs, so anyone affected by tariffs has to find ways to dodge. What it means, I mean, it means maybe more work from compliance, because maybe in addition to like sanctions, you're now worrying about tariffs. But it should theoretically mean that where US entities are focusing on their home market, like Chinese businesses are going out. I think it's already starting to happen. So if I were like in practice, I'd be trying to develop relationships there, because you imagine that they'd be going, obviously Nigeria is not the most attractive place at the moment. And maybe like if I was speaking to the folks in trade and investment, I'd be thinking the opportunity is that it's the Americans, it's the Europeans, it's the British that are saying on about how it's so hard to do business here because they are used to super organized systems and all of that. The Chinese, maybe some other Asian markets, things are already tricky there. So maybe the jump, like how much you need to do to attract them, isn't necessarily. And then critically, they are also feeling pressure, because if you are a Chinese business, you are facing the threat of tariffs. You are thinking, what are my other routes to, like, I mean, it will be difficult because obviously we are dealing with sophisticated folks in the US. I think a story I was reading a couple of days ago about solar panels. I mean, prices are down a lot. A lot is coming from China. They are worried about tariffs and hostility, and what they are doing is they are setting up. Well, I mean, it's obviously it's a skill, but somewhere between manufacturing and assembling in other markets that you hope if you produce the base stuff and then you put it together in Indonesia and nobody's hitting on Indonesia, maybe Indonesia can be your route back into the US. So that's where I think the opportunity is, and that's where I would say, like, if I was thinking from a practice perspective, start preparing for those people. If I was thinking from a government perspective, start trying to capture that new capital that's looking for alternative places. I think maybe the final thing is just around oil prices. My bet, which is kind of tricky because nobody really knows for sure, is that the war should come to an end soon. I think already you are seeing they've agreed a ceasefire in the Middle East. Ukraine and Russia both know that there's a ticking clock. I mean, no one can exactly say, probably even the guy himself, how the US might respond to that situation. But my bet is that it's only going to go on so much longer because there clearly isn't very much appetite in the new government to support. That should mean more oil flowing and therefore oil prices down, which maybe is bad from a Nigerian perspective because it means that revenue and that FX crisis is still there. But I mean, that's a trend that you imagine will shape things in general. And I wouldn't necessarily be chasing oil and gas business as much as I might something else.
Hopefully there are oil and gas folks in. But yeah, I mean, both of you, I think you have sort of touched on different things. So one from post-election protectionism in America, and I think also in
potentially in some parts of the UK as well, and how that also could mean that the amount of development aid or even foreign investments coming from those markets are likely to reduce, and that's maybe something for us to start thinking about. And that brings me to you, Chioma, in terms of all of this. So how are you preparing? Like, you lead the legal and compliance team at an infrastructure fund. We don't know if, we can't really say what's going to happen next year in terms of whether we're going to be seeing more investment from the US static market or whether we should be expecting more participation from Asia, those sorts of markets. With the war hopefully coming to an end, supply chains hopefully should sort of get better. This means there'll be more commerce, more transactions. And as for a legal person, or if generalize, we just say, whether you're a legal person internally or as someone in private practice, what are the things that you would be doing or you think, we should be doing to sort of prepare for hopefully a positive 2025?
Yeah, I think Jennifer and Dipo has perfectly captured it. A big thing is the impact of the change that has happened in the US and how that, Donald Trump is going to actually come into power in 2025. So for up to now, we've all been having theoretical conversations about the things that he's supposed to do. So in 2025 is when he's actually going to start implementing those things, and then when we start seeing impact. So the key thing is to stay on trend, and then, like Jennifer said, again, look at how to keep up, upskill if necessary, try to diversify to other markets, look at Asia, Europe, and similar. And then more importantly is that, at least, especially for some of us also, is to look internally. If we're looking at climate financing, for example, at COP39, one of the key things that happened was the 300 billion for developing markets. Now, what?
So you mentioned COP29 as well. Is it optimistic about it? Because I don't think that Trump is a supporter of the whole climate change, whatever it is that we're doing at COP29. And I think that if the US is backtracked from that agreement and that convention, how fruitful or how possible, how optimistic are you about this whole increased financing coming into developing countries or emerging markets in the first place? Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you can.
So, to be quite candid, yes, I get the point, but I think it's early days, right? I don't think that there's going to be 100% backtrack. So there are all the agreements that have been reached. I know some of them are yet to be finalized, but they have like drafts already in terms of what they have agreed, right? So in principle, the idea is that you would have this tripling of the funds going to the developing economies, and you would have the fund. There's also a fund that you're also able to access. I think it's the climate fund. Now, all of these would help. There are all sorts of like infrastructure companies, just general corporates in developing markets that we're talking about having the problem with sourcing effects, problem with sourcing funds because commercial rates are so high. CPs that used to be quite low are also so high. So you have to start to think about, strategize, how are we going to be able to access some of these funds? So the funds will come in. When they come in, we don't know. The extent of the funds that comes in, we don't know yet. But as I understand it, there are already funds that you can access. And for you to be able to access those funds, you must, of course, be able to comply with the terms and conditions of the funds. So you still have a number of opportunities. For green bonds, for instance, a lot of companies are accessing those funds. The first thing is just to be able to meet all the terms, right? So, whether or not the US pulls back, to be quite candid, I don't think it's going to be a total 100% pulling back. So what that leaves us with is there will be some funds. And even so it's delayed. Exactly. But people have to be strategically positioned to be able to access those funds. And they're cheaper funds.
Yeah, I mean, let me go.
Well, one of the things I was going to say as well was that in addition to whatever it is that's going to come in, because even if they've had some deal, they've agreed 300 billion, that number is even like doesn't start to scratch the surface in terms of what is needed. In the money that is needed, at least from the analysis that has been done, is about 1.4 trillion per annum, and we just got 300. So there's still some work anyway to meet whatever difference. And then if there is going to be maybe some limiting of cash flows externally, then we also need to start to look internally to see how we can raise local financing and domestic financing. We've seen a number of people start to raise Naira and local currency denominated funds. People are targeting, for example, the pension funds who have assets available to invest. So those are also some of the avenues that we should be looking into and preparing to see, am I compliant, etc. Even people who are raising are also targeting the pension funds as well. As a matter of fact, the SEC just released some draft regulations to govern CPs, just because they want to make sure that the market is compliant enough so that the pension funds can start to access that. So that is also one thing that people can start to position themselves to be able to take advantage of once it goes live.
I think also that sometimes, or maybe a lot of times, possibly because of how he speaks, like people assume a bit too much about Donald Trump and his influence on things. ESG, what it always reminds me, and this is a random thing, is about Batman and being arguing, and there's some conversation where Batman switches off the lights because they're fighting, and Bane starts laughing. You think darkness is your friend. I was born in the dark. I bred in that. So I think the idea is with ESG in general and climate specifically, like all of the Nigerian, all of the vast majority of the Africa-focused funds, like this is part of their day-to-day life. Like there's a ton of non-government, just regular investor money across America, Europe, everywhere. There's a ton of even just regular family office money. There's a ton of money already looking for those opportunities. If you are a manager in Africa, in Nigeria specifically, I mean, you may not want to call yourself a climate fund or an impact fund, but like those are invariably a significant part of your thesis because there's a lot of cash coming from there already. So all this COP is nice sounding and all that, but to a large extent, it probably doesn't make that much of a difference from a Nigeria perspective. It means it just highlights that there's more money, and even if only half of that money is then distributed. Like total FDI for Nigeria is what? In the last couple of years, it's been single digits, maybe 3 billion, 4 billion. If you even say we get if they have or divide that by 25, only 25% of that money comes through. There's still, if Nigeria then gets 1% or that 25%, it will still significantly shift the narrative. Exactly. So I don't think this.
Okay, that's quite assuring. I think one thing to just kind of maybe chip in before we move to the next part of the conversation will be in terms of like, so going into 2025, and I think we kind of, even though this wasn't supposed to be a conversation around climate change and sustainability, we really kind of touched on it, and I think just to sort of wrap up that conversation would be in terms of like ESG going into 2025, do you think that's going to be like a strong thing, especially for lawyers internally or in-house? Do you think that's the thing we should still be concerned about?
So to be quite candid, I think yes. I think it's an area that a lot of people have to focus on because as we see it, clean energy, clean environment, that's the thing, right? And that's what everybody's looking forward to. And from that perspective, like Dipo had mentioned, there's so many funds that are already focused on all of this. So the only way that you can sort of play in that space as lawyers particularly is developing the skill in that area. So you find a lot of corporates, as they do transactions, they're looking for lawyers or they're looking for specialists that can be ESG coordinators, sustainability coordinators. And so from that perspective, you can start to play that kind of role. You can start to provide those sort of advice. Because, like you say, it's extremely important for people to position themselves to get a number of all these funds. So you find in recent times there are a lot of social funds, for instance, bonds, like social bonds, bonds relating to water, just things coming around that are impacting the ecosystem, right? Making sure that we're getting clean environment. And so it's extremely important for us to upskill to get into that space.
And I think the second part of that question will be focusing on the governance part, because there's always the environmental issues. But the governance part, and I'm going to say that because there's a bit of it that, I think if everyone has sort of followed this, there's a bit of scandals from like startups, startups that have raised funds and have managed and mismanaged the funds, and as well as corporate, like established companies as well, in terms of like financial engineering, misreporting, and all of that. And I'm going to ask you both Dipo and Chioma in terms of this, like, going into 2025, based on what you have seen, you are investing in a company, or for the companies that you have invested in, what are stuff that you're expecting to see from a governance perspective? If and especially from like the legal or the compliance team, focusing on the governance part of it, I guess.
Well, so I think, part of the value add is sometimes when going into the company, sometimes the governance framework is not yet there. So the governance is not yet there. So a large percentage of the work that you do going in is just getting that commitment that these are the sort of things that you need to see. You need to have your board, you need to have independent members, you need to have this reporting, you need to adopt IFLR as well. You need to change your auditors perhaps to maybe like some auditors, maybe Big Fours or whatever, depending on what your criteria is. So you need to see that, you need to see your reporting, you have those quarterly board meetings, because there are some companies that at the time you're coming, they never had a board meeting.
Yeah.
So it's at that point that people are then they're setting up you have a quarterly board meeting, you're bringing on a company secretary. Sometimes they don't have an in-house compliance or legal team. So those are some of the things that need to now start coming into play when the deal is done, or either after or before. So it's important, again, to look into all of this and have the skills to be able to take advantage of that opportunity as it comes.
Yeah, exactly. You almost felt like you were reading my mind about that. I'm just curious, Chioma, like how much of that work do you actually get some good quality support to do? Versus how much of it you guys end up having to do yourselves?
I can't even begin to, because here's the thing, right? So a lot of a good percentage of the work we end up doing internally.
Exactly.
What do you mean internally? Mature companies or small startups.
Everything. So in fact, when you brought the point up, my intention was to look to you. Like this, if you ask me what keeps me up at night the most as in-house legal, it's because it's super hard. It applies across. It's sometimes even easier to deal with it in the startups, because they know that. Either they know or they don't have any baggage of this is how we've done it. They just know they've been focused on something else. But in the older companies, they have a way they work, and basically it feels like you are doing a deal. You know that due diligence, you can almost plug and play. Like 100 firms will line up, they want to offer you that due diligence. But I guess governance-wise, folks do that box checking, board evaluation, or governance evaluation. But actually, where the work is really difficult, the whole dynamic around transitioning the company into operating a proper delegation of authority document and a proper structure, and moving them from your usual the MD is the owner of the company, so your board meetings aren't quite structured. Moving them into a more institutionalized, proper structure, there just isn't very much help there. And when lawyers, like law firms talk about ESG, it seems like they focus on the reporting stuff, which I feel is stuff that the Big Four can already compete with you in. And I mean, the reporting stuff is a pain. Many times, like I guess a lot of us have in-house folks that deal with the reporting, and the reporting is not what really keeps us up. It's that you know. If either you are dealing with a startup which is new and they've been focused on running business, or many times they are dealing with a Nigerian company maybe it's a family-owned business, or even if it's not a family-owned business, it's a close, small group of shareholders that haven't had much experience dealing with external shareholders. So they've run their business in a particular way. They've been somewhat focused, just like the startups, on growth. But in their minds, this is what got us here. The investor comes in, you spend all the time negotiating terms up front, doing DD, all those things. But all of this other stuff is critical to actually the dynamic of your relationship, how the investment will go. And all of that stuff we end up doing to a large extent with limited examples. So if a law firm is thinking about what might be an area that I might build a practice in 2025 and forward, like that's the space where exactly people will pay for, but not in the box ticking way, but in the substantive way. What is Chioma?
People will pay a reasonable amount.
I think they would actually pay because they want to access funds. So when their mindset is towards funds, then they start to do whatever it is you ask them to do. But the only problem, like you said, is that from a governance standpoint, a lot of them are set in their ways. A lot of them are, like you said, family-owned businesses. So you want to continue to have authority. You want to continue to have control. And because you want to continue to have control, it's difficult for you to have those sort of board meetings, to bring people into your space. And that's where the problem is.
Just to round up this conversation, would there be any recommendations, tools, or framework that you would recommend to lawyers, obviously, internally, in terms of, or even like law firms, if you say, improving the governance within your operations or within your companies? Maybe use this framework or use this as a guide in terms of what should be done. The clear ones are like, have board meetings, have like authority matrix, have what's it called, clear delineation of responsibilities, I think, right? But would there be like any framework that you would recommend?
Well, I don't know about framework, but I think just sort of wearing the caps of both Dipo and Chioma, I think something that is quite important, particularly from a lawyer standpoint, is because we're the ones who typically would incorporate entities. So again, that's for Amala and Co, right? So as you incorporate those entities, you must start to let them understand that there's benefits with putting your house in order. And you must start to let them understand that putting your house in order would mean governance, particularly. Would mean that if you don't have a good governance system, you can't access funds. You can't actually even go to the commercial banks to get funds as well. And so if your business would thrive, if your business would grow and develop from just that family-owned type of business to a more sophisticated type of business, then you must put your house in order. So I think from a legal advisory standpoint, it's important to just start to carry them along. And as you do carry them along, then they see importance in you as well, because you assist them to get to the finish line, more or less.
Well, I think just to add, I never used to, as a human being, as a person, I never used to value governance until perhaps I got into the insolvency business. And I then got to understand firsthand what the lack of corporate governance does to entities, right? Especially for some of these startups, right? I chase a lot of them around. And then when I sit down, if I get an appointment as an IP, as an insolvency practitioner, then I sit down with them and I say, okay, guys, let's look at it. And it boils down to simple governance issue that the MD was flying first class to London when the company was obviously struggling, right? And that's simply because he calls the accountant and they checks and balance and they just pay that. So I think, as lawyers, we cannot overemphasize and over-preach issues relating to governance, right? Would the market listen? I think it depends on the maturity of the company. I think usually they tend to then listen when they want to then scale.
Yeah.
That's what typically happens. And my worry then is you listen, you pretend that you are doing it, get the funding, and that is it. At the end of the day, the entire thing goes to drain. But I think we can, especially for some of us who are in-house, and then we get, to work with whether it's the MDs or some of these corporates, is to say, look, it's in your best interest. You want your business to become sustainable, right? You want your business to scale. You want your business to outgrow. You probably need to instill some of these corporate governance mechanisms and principles from early on. Because from my experience, I think also it's very difficult, especially when the business has matured a bit, for you to then adopt some of these mechanisms and some of these principles. Because you're like, we've gotten to where we are. Without this, why do we then need to? So I think it's preaching until we get to that point where we get to adopt some of these things.
I agree as well. I don't know if we have any questions right now before we move to hopefully the more interesting part of the conversation. Questions?
Maybe we take everything and then.
Yeah. Okay. I'll start with you, Amala. I think this is also something that everyone has probably, well, maybe not everyone, lots of us have encountered. I mean, you can be around because you're going into 2025. You're probably planning your retreats or strategy session and all of that. And it's around I don't want to say maybe the importance of mental health for you as a lawyer. Regardless of whether you're a junior lawyer, a senior lawyer, or you run your own practice. I wanted to ask you whether it's something you've thought about, and if it's something you've thought about, what you have done in terms of sort of optimizing your mental health as someone who practices law.
Mental health. You want to put me in trouble? No, I'm just kidding.
But if you're looking to optimize whatever opportunities are in 2025, you should be hopefully,
looking into that.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the most difficult questions you ask maybe a partner or. So I was in a meeting with some of my colleagues, and then we get a call from one of our colleagues in Mauritius, and then it's a video call, and I say, "What's going on?" He says, "Oh, I'm on the beach with some of my, not even some, we are having a beach day and all that." And then I say, "You must be living the life, right? Because you don't get some of these opportunities a lot in over here." I think we just have to be deliberate, right? Especially whether it's 2024 or going into 2025, right? Especially for some of us in law practice, right? We have to be deliberate about our mental health. We have to be deliberate about how we react to some of these pressure that are sometimes given to us by the likes of Jennifer. Right? To be honest, how do you do that, especially if you're a law firm, right? It's by adopting some things that perhaps may not look very significant, but it's actually significant for some of our colleagues. So things as simple as work from home policies, right? As mundane as they sound, may be one of those things that will help in, assisting in stemming the table and also helping to improve on some of these issues surrounding mental health. The reality is that if you have burnt out colleagues, you won't be able to have the sort of output that Dipo would like to see from some of us, that to be able to pay our invoices, isn't it? So, overall, it would be for, I think, firms. I like to talk about firms because I think that's where you have some of the most pressure. I'm not saying in-house would not have these sort of pressures, but I think you then ultimately transfer it to some of us. So it would be to what we are doing as a firm and what we would recommend would be to listen to your colleagues, right? Actually genuinely listen and then soak in those feedback and then implement policies around some of these things. So for me, because I see a lot of firms now scaling back from I guess obvious reasons, genuine reasons, valid reasons, right? Which is that some of our colleagues tend to become very lax simply because they are working from home. But I think we can only continue implementing those policies in order to manage those things, right?
Thank you. Jennifer, how about you? I mean, I think just in terms of like balancing what you have done, you know, around mental health, and I think maybe just also extend that to working hopefully within an in-house team, right?
So I mean, I think it's pretty much the same thing across board, to be quite candid, because again, as lawyers, whether you're in-house or you're in private practice, typically you do tend to want to get everything done. Like one of the partners I'd worked with in the past had mentioned that, you know, dead lawyers don't work. And, you know, again, that's because she had a breakdown and it was an advice that her doctor gave her. So in reality, it's something we must continue to put at the back of our minds, that as much as you want the transaction to close, so Dipo is telling us that, oh, you know, sometimes the bank is always harassing them, it's always this, always that. So it's always every time. So you see, they put us on our toes because, again, you are sort of dealing with a lot of clients, a lot of customers, we call them clients. And even from the private practice standpoint as well, they're also looking at a lot of clients that have pressures, right? And because of that, you tend to want to get everything done so that you can free yourself up. But it's not the way to go sometimes. So yes, you can spread the work, you can try to, you know, create different mechanisms to ease out, but it's important to just know at the back of your mind that dead lawyers don't work, right? And so from that perspective, be very mindful of your mental health. Again, what you find in organizations now is that there's that the push, people must go on leave. So in my organization, people must go on leave because you find that people are carrying extra leave days because they're trying to sort out their work. But it's important because, again, if you have a burnout situation, then who does the work? And then the clients at the end of the day would get the back end. So, you know, it's important that we just continue to be mindful of these things. And then also as organizations, it's important to also put some of these, put some checks and also create some avenues for people who are burnt out to be able to reach out and get help. You know, for people who have mental health issues for one reason or the other, to be able to reach out and get free help, right? And not having to bother about paying for those one-on-one type of sessions. So you find that increasingly in organizations. So it's just to encourage law firms as well to have that kind of structure in place as well, not just in-house, to assist the people that we work with.
Chioma, do you want to add anything?
I think what I can also add is taking some personal steps as well. For example, having an exercise routine when you wake up in the morning. Sometimes, even when in the middle of work, you can take out 5 minutes, some stretches, because of course there's also that what comes with just having to sit for a very long time staring at the computer. Sometimes we're doing that for over 10, 12 hours at a stretch, your eyes are strained. So if you can take out 5 minutes, look up, you look around, and then you go back. And then some organizations also introduce things like sometimes like maybe for 3 minutes or 5 minutes, HR just like in my office we have like screens, and then the HR just said, oh, everybody should stand up and do some stretches.
Oh, really?
And then you stand up and you do your stretches and then you sit down. And that also helps. You can have things like maybe Wellness Wednesday or Wellness whatever, or a particular day, and then you can check people's PPs. You can bring fruits instead of stocking your fridge with Coke and Fanta and any of those. You just put fruit, apples, those little things as well on a daily basis, so that even when the pressure, because undoubtedly there's always going to be periods where you have that pressure, and then there's a genuine reason why, like things are definitely going to go bad if like you are not able to meet whatever it is. When that's over, take out 1 day. Maybe come in late. Maybe come in 12 if you have if you don't have hybrid or work from home. You can ask you can give your subordinate some time to come in, just take that breather.
Yeah.
And then when that project is over, take that breather, get some rest, and then be able to take on additional things as they come up.
Yeah, it's very, very, very practical, Chioma, because I think undoubtedly, regardless of whether you work in private practice or you work in-house, we're like a high pressure profession, and it's important that, and a lot of this is also intellectual. So if your mental well-being isn't optimal, isn't at the right place, it's going to eventually affect the quality of your work, and after a while, it starts to impact your physical body. And 20% he did where I can't be closing transactions. So I think that's something we should all sort of take away, even as you go into the new year. You're trying to optimize for the whatever it is you're trying to optimize for. Just also bear in mind that your mental well-being is something that's very important. And that brings me to another interesting, part of this conversation, which will be in terms of how do we utilize technology to improve our work in 2025. I will try not to mention anything, but feel free to let us know. This goes to all the moderators, all the panelists rather. Feel free to let us know what you're doing, what tools you're using. Starting from the messaging tools that you're using, how you're even I need to mention that how you're even optimizing conversations with external counsel that you work with or your clients as well. How you're improving the quality of your research or drafting, whatever it is, and how you're doing that. And then maybe we can drill down into specifics. But I just kind of like to hear from all the moderators, what sort of how you're using technology to improve your work. I can start with you, Chioma.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to lie, ChatGPT has been very helpful. It's been very helpful from breaking down concepts, especially when you're a lawyer, and then there are some of these concepts and you need to understand what these people are talking about. And of course, you can't go into trying to understanding the jargons, etc. You ask ChatGPT, ChatGPT breaks it down. Sometimes ChatGPT makes it fail. You ask ChatGPT, are you sure this is correct? ChatGPT say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But yeah, so it can do all of that, right? And it's very helpful in terms of just making things, taking out those mundane, just those basic things, and then while we focus on the complex day-to-day activities. So even without using any sophisticated messaging, there are some other things that you can use. For example, even as simple as scheduling emails. There are some times that I work best, right? And then when that time comes, I do a bunch of automated things, and I set them to go. This one go 8 o'clock, this go 12 o'clock, this go 1 o'clock, and then I'm not having to do those things in the middle of my day. If it is things as simple as, these are all the drafts, notice of board meetings, etc. These are things you just automate, nothing is changing. Try and see how, if there are means of automating them, you have your calendar invitations all sent once in a year for the entire year. Just do all of that and just take that out so that you're not bearing the mental load for some of those things, and then you can focus on the complex stuff. So those are some of the simple ways that I incorporate technology into my day-to-day.
Amala?
I think, anybody who doesn't adapt to technology, and as an organization, whether you're a law firm, whether you're a company, and you're not quite new when it comes to that, you will be doing yourself a lot of disservice, let me put it that way. So speaking from a law firm's perspective, and that ties to the issue of mental health, some of the mundane tasks that we get our lawyers to do can actually be solved through technology. And that frees up time for them. And the sort of pressure that typically they would go and they will be under, for instance, would become lessened. So even as a firm, what we've done is recently we've invested quite significantly. I tell my partners that was a bit late. We've invested quite significantly on a technology that would sort of digitalize everything that we do as a firm. We've done a phase, right? And that to me has been quite resounding in terms of the feedback.
and we're now trying to scale it to every aspect of the firm.
Can you tell us a bit more about, I mean, to the extent that you're able to disclose, just so that we...
Yeah, no, it's an operational, software, let me put it that way, right? That, for everything from accounting to HR to operations to case reporting to virtually everything, calendaring, automates it. I'm a big believer in automation. And I believe that if you're able to automate all your processes, it lessens the time that you're going to do that. So, like I said, I thought to myself, and I then told my partners that we're a bit late because we should have implemented that from day one. So, not a lot of Nigerian law firms invest in some of these things, right? You'll be shocked that you go to some firms and then you still see them carrying case files, right? And I do litigation, and I then find myself going to court with case, with files, and then I ask myself that's a very antiquated method, right? But you deal with an antiquated system, so if you dare come to court and you're flipping through your pad without, or maybe you are citing an authority and then it's not hard copy. In fact, I was before a judge, I think yesterday or day before yesterday. And I cited an authority that was Law Pavilion. I said, no, Amala, he wants the hard one in Nigeria Weekly Law Report. So, but I think at the end of the day, it makes the work lighter. And then even from a client-facing perspective, right, there are some areas that you would see that with technology, you're even able to make the life of the client easier. So let's say from a deals perspective, for instance, issues relating to data room, how you do some of these due diligence can actually be done especially if you work with foreign counsel, you would see that there are ways that you can do it. For those who are probably in the annuity business, maybe that do IP, for instance, I tend to tell my guys who are in that area, and we're now developing a tech around it, that a client gives you an instruction, for instance, and then says, do so thing for me. And then you end up sending emails periodically and stuff like that. So you can have a portal where the client just simply goes, places the instruction there, and then, you update the client through that portal. Any progress that you're making, you will just simply update. All the client needs to do is just to open their, have access to that portal, see everything that you've done, and it's able to keep track. So whether it's a transaction, it sees that, okay, this major notification has been filed, this is how long it takes and all that. It solves a bit of some of the feedback problems, because sometimes, especially when we, do some level of discussion with our colleagues, whether it's law firms abroad or whether it's corporate outside the country or even in Nigeria, right? And increasingly we're seeing that with that, they tell you that the feedback time for law firms, it's usually very slow. You send something and it's acknowledged after 48 hours and it's dealt with a long time. But if you have that sort of mechanism where you don't need to do certain things, all you need to do simply use some of this technology, then it makes things. So I'm also a big believer in some of the AI tools, right? There's no shame about it, right? I know Microsoft have just developed Copilot, for instance, right? There's ChatGPT, there's Gemini by Google, and the one from X, for instance. So for me, there's no need fighting these things because they will eventually take over, right? So all you need to do is to adapt some of these technology. So rather than fight it, which I see most law firms do, simply because I tend to think that lawyers are the most least receptive persons to changes. That's the reality, especially when it comes to technology. I would rather say, especially for law firms, that you should integrate and adapt some of these things because it makes the life of your colleagues easier, right? So that's my thought about it.
Dipo?
I mean, I'm tempted to challenge the lawyer adapting them. No, but I think so. First, just side note on that. I think ages ago, I remember the concern with doing, like when I started work, the concern with doing your legal research with Google, well, you wouldn't then, I mean, not that you won't find accurate results, like if you pay the right attention, you find accurate results, but then like you can end up in a world where you're not citing it right.
Yeah.
And obviously, like from a legal perspective, that citation makes a difference, right?
Yeah.
So that might be why a judge is complaining about law pavilion versus Nigerian weekly citation. So I think the risk is always with technology. It's not always that lawyers don't like adopting. It's that if you don't build those foundations, then like you can't do it and you don't know what's right. But people should definitely. But I think I'll look at this from a slightly different perspective. Obviously, when we say technology, we think about the more complicated things like AI, like software. Well, I think one experience I've had, maybe it's more uniform, maybe not. It's just I feel like if you work with a typical city law firm in the UK, if you work with 3 different partners on the same kind of transaction, if you are doing an acquisition, so you work with 3 different partners, the structure of the document, the content of the document, the experience of that acquisition, many times it's very similar. The variability is very small. My experience has been that if you work with a Nigerian law firm, many times, same law firm, same kind of transaction, but different partners, the variability is too much. Let me say it's significant. What that suggests to me is they aren't using technology enough, and that, I mean, obviously it makes it inefficient for them, and it's on some level it's their problem, but it's my problem as well because my process doesn't then proceed as efficiently as it might. A technology that is really great for people that do financing is the LMA standard form documents that. All of that, I mean, they shortened all of that negotiation process, made everything easier. The bounds are more narrow. I like to see technology like that, like standard forms that define the bounds of doing an M&A deal. Too many acquisition deals take forever because lawyers start at both extremes when they don't know that they are not like, I'm not going to give you indemnities for every single small issue. But we don't have, I'm calling it technology, but we don't have enough of a standard form and maybe obviously that reduces technology to some money, but it is technology, right? That standard framework, that means that we can okay, no need to waste time on all these ones, that we know what market is, we can just get it done and move forward. And that will make everybody's life. So I'd like to see more of that technology adopted. I think at work, that's what we've also been thinking about. If you look back, I mean, I work in private equity. Maybe this is a lot easier because everything is almost standardized. But on the PE side, you see that you check, maybe you do 3 transactions in 1 year. One takes 6 months, another takes 8 months. And the question is like, well, this is a long time spent working on this. Like we at the beginning we're clear, we're interested, the other side was interested, and still it took so long. Like, how can we shorten like if this is what I do every day, then I need to find more efficient ways to do it. So what we've increasingly been doing is like our own technology in a sense, but what we call building blocks. So upfront, we already have like something that we find on an ongoing basis, but we have what we expect our standard unique to us governance rights to be, like how we expect that engagement to be, and from day one, like this is the boundaries with which we are even having a conversation, and those things are supposed to help move those along. So I'd like to see Nigerian law firms, but lawyers in general, adopt more of those kinds of technologies. I mean, in a sense, that's what ChatGPT is doing for you, because it's just like trained on the whole world of models. Like you as a law firm, like you have your own, like put together your own models, create your own standard output, and then be your own ChatGPT so that so your work can be better.
The point you mentioned about working with same law firm in the US, or working with 3 different law firms, and you kind of have a level of certainty in terms of what the documentation would be like, and it's different with Nigerian law firms, and it's also, it could also be a technology issue, like standardize your processes, even if the document is coming from partner A or partner B. Like you've done these deals countless number of times. Your associates should spend time drafting, starting from the scratch, when different partners in this firm have done this deal countless number of times. There should be like at least some level of starting point where it's easier to generate, and you can send that to guys, and you're not sending me timesheets from associate spend 5 hours drafting an SP. Come on, it's an SP, it's not a new document that's drafted.
Yeah, so
We have to meet target.
Maybe target or something like that.
Quality over.
yeah, so to be quite candid, yes, I completely agree with that, and I align wholly. So when you look at the processes, and just speaking to what Dipo has said, when you look at the processes that law firms in foreign jurisdictions, the way that they do it, they have like technologies that help them to generate the first draft of the documents. That's why you will find similarity in the document that is generated, because it is generated from technology, basically. In Nigeria, you don't have a lot of that. So what you have is you probably have templates that you have used before, and then the lawyers would have to start from the scratch to read from the beginning to the end to be sure that it aligns with the transaction, it aligns. But in reality, to the extent that it is a base document, it can be generated using technology. But again, just to sort of look at things from a different perspective, there's also the fear, I suspect, from Nigerian lawyers that, because we're dealing with clients, you want to be very specific in terms of the kind of technology that you adopt. Because again, you don't want a situation where data privacy issues start to arise. And I think that's also one of the reasons why you see a lot of pushback. It's not so much that, well, I suspect it's not so much that Nigerian law firms or lawyers don't want to adopt technology so quickly. But I mean, when you think about it, things like practical law, Westlaw, and all the other ones, law firms, they subscribe to those because it's just research tools. So in terms of research tools, yes, it's easier to sort of adopt. I use those as well. But just getting the kinds of technology that would aid or help your business to do better, the productivity. I think it's probably, if you have the issues with data privacy, then you probably have to start considering getting a developer to develop something that is unique to your business. Data privacy issues are dealt with, and you be comfortable that you're getting the best output from whatever it is that you're doing. So from that perspective, yes.
Yeah, the point you mentioned about, well, not two questions
Accumulate.
Yeah, the point you mentioned about data privacy reminds me of someone I was listening to, there was a panel I was listening to, and they were talking about how the law firm was developing their own model, I think, for document generation or something. I can't remember what it was about. But then they were also using client information, so transactions from clients, and then someone addressed it like, do you have your client's consent to use their transactions, their information to train your models? And it was like, it wasn't, I felt sorry for the guy on the panel because I don't think it was something that they had thought about, or maybe they had thought about, or maybe not in that context of, oh yes, you may have their general consent to, retain their information or use it in developing your own model, developing your processes or whatever it is. But then do you have their specific consent to use their transaction data, counterparts transaction, counterparts to transactions information is that to develop a model that you are going to use to commercialize your practice, right? So I think that's an important issue, even like in terms of, as you think about using different technology tools to amplify what you're doing, whether internally in-house or even as a law firm. And I think that just brings me to maybe our penultimate question.
But just sorry, I'm really sorry. Just to your point, because I know there's a global law firm, there's South African office that are having issues currently, because of issues related to data protection and stuff like that. I think for me, I actually think that technology is a big enabler in terms of data privacy, if you do it well.
Yeah.
Because, I have a dual life, right? I have not too many transactional life nowadays because I have partners that deal with that. But I deal with, the more antiquated type of practice that some of you on this table don't deal with, which is litigation. And that is a beehive of infringement of clients' data privacy. You understand? Because essentially everything is done from an analog paper system. So I actually think that if we're more concerned about things relating to data privacy, because to be honest, I'm not sure how many law firms in Nigeria, perhaps maybe in the near future, but that would be ready. We haven't even scaled to first step. I'm not sure how many ones would have gotten to that extent of having a model to train, for instance. I mean, I would be happy to.
Sure.
Yeah, that's why I said that I'll be happy to be challenged. So I try to know what my competitors are doing. But the reality there is that I think that if you are concerned as a law firm, I'm talking about law firms because obviously corporates are light years ahead of us. But I'm talking about you being concerned about things like data privacy, you should then embrace technology because those are the things that would actually secure clients' data. Obviously, issues that are relating to consent, for instance, would become some of the front burner issues that one will have to look at.
Jennifer, you don't answer. No, I think it's fine actually, but I was just going to say that from like a litigation, I know you spoke about litigation. From a litigation standpoint, your risk is actually limited because it is public information. So if you look at the regulations, the data privacy regulations for most jurisdictions, those are accepted. So you really won't have that problem. But when you look at the situation with transaction lawyers, I haven't put the names of the clients, but again, because you're going to be looking at, there might be specifics that it's going to be difficult for you to say, you know what, this is not actually your transaction, this is somebody else's transaction, then you're exposed. And it's from that perspective, really, that you have to start thinking about how you're going to protect yourself from a data privacy standpoint. So considerations, but for me, I think ultimately, build your own model and reduce some of those risks, maybe like use of data privacy, use of technology can deal with those. As you're engaging your clients, you have somewhere in a clause somewhere to say that you're consenting to the use of. Yeah. So maybe that's a way to sort of deal with it, because at that point, people are not really so particular about whether I use my transaction or you don't, and they just stick it.
I mean, it's just for first, one of the arguments that we had in court, right, was that was involved in data privacy matter. One of the arguments was whether even public information or even information that you are mandated to disclose by law, whether you then still need consent, or if you do not need consent, whether you needed to give notice. And it was a very strong, very heated argument. And all that, but it's one of those things we probably get to pay the legal because
Not controversial.
I think it's just maybe to add to what you said in terms of like if you're using your client's data or you're potentially going to be using their information, making sure that they are aware you have consent and notice. And I think also for like in-house teams as well, there's also the bit of while you, the head of legal or the senior legal person, may be aware of, I'm using an AI tool, I know the limitations, I know the risk of putting company information on this model, and this thing is going to be stored and be used and processed by this model. Maybe also having like safeguard or rules for the team as well. So whether for your in-house legal team or the entire company, we're going to be using, you can't stop folks from using the tool to an extent, right? But then what's going to be like the guardrails for using these tools, and how do we ensure that, okay, maybe, what's called activated the do not record or do not use my data for training the models, options on the tools, and just making sure that people are, if you're kind of using it for research purposes, don't put specifics. If you're using this in this manner, try to do sort of information. But again, I think that's also something that we probably need to think about as lawyers going into 2025. And with that, I will come to my last question for the panelists, and it will be, what would be like your one thing to think about in 2025?
So the big thing actually is centered around this last conversation that we just had, which is how to use legal tech to make your life easier. So there's a lot of work going into that. I know that a lot of people are going to be looking into how to make their own, how to develop their own. Of course, it doesn't mean that they are going to develop from scratch, but maybe you get what already exists and put the guardrails so that you are dealing with issues of data privacy, etc. And then I know that some law firms, of course, are looking into having their own software development team and having all of those things. So the big thing for 2025 is, number one, leveraging legal tech to make life easier. And then, of course, also leveraging legal tech, of course, continue to upskill and up to trend with all of the changes that are going to happen and ensuring that you're ready to deal with those challenges or those issues or take advantage of any opportunities as it presents itself in 2025. Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I could say it differently. If I can, I think for me, the big point would be just upskill yourself, continue to upskill. Because, like you said, there are a lot of changes, potential impacts on businesses. And we can sit in our comfort zone, but that's typically the worst place to be when you're so comfortable sitting in one place, right? So I think it's best for us to continue to upskill, continue to develop yourself, so that, as you continue to follow the trends, that this is the next thing to do. This is the right place to do it. This is how you should deal with it. And you can provide better advice to your clients, to your stakeholders, to get the best results, essentially.
Thank you.
I think one trend that I expect to continue from 2024 is Nigerian businesses, like Nigerian practices. Everyone has that sense that this market is so very tough that you can't keep all your eggs in one basket. So, like, all manufacturing businesses are talking about how can they diversify. I think everybody's realizing that our neighbors in Francophone West Africa have very stable currency compared to our up and down. So I think that trend is going to continue. So as a lawyer, whether you are working in-house, whether you are in practice, you have to be prepared for a world in which you are going to need to sort of advise across. So whether that means from a practice perspective, you are building relationships so that you can pass your clients on to folks there, or you are building local capacity in those markets, or you get yourself familiar with those regimes so that you can advise across. If you are in-house as well, almost same logic. You need to assume that your business is going to be thinking more about like moving in some because obviously it's no as if you are like already more national and you're already spread out. But you need to be thinking about it from that perspective and thinking, okay, maybe it's something as basic as learning French because obviously the markets are French. Or it's something more sort of strategic about thinking about familiarizing yourself with Ohada law or the frameworks there, or also building relationships with, like if you are in-house, you still need to work with external counsel, right?
Yeah.
You know a lot of them in the market where you are. You need to start building those relationships there as well. So I think because of that likely continuous push to diversify, like as a lawyer, you also then have to prepare by diversifying your practice.
Thank you. Amala?
I mean, obviously, from a law firm perspective, I think to some of our colleagues, I think going into 2025 would be to understand that it's now very old-fashioned to do everything, right? So you have to start thinking deeply in terms of your strategy. Because I know a lot of law firms who have to do retreats either end of the year or beginning of the year 2025 to look at their strategy. So probably, if you claim to be a full-service law firm, for instance, invest in bringing in true experts to come in. I think gone are the days when you can wing it out, right? Or use the local palace, bobo your way out, right? So you need to probably think about sharing the pie, or think about looking at bringing in more experts. It's for the simple reason that from a Nigerian market perspective, it's going to be more cacophony of laws, isn't it? Look at tax, for instance. I personally can't keep up with what's going on there, right? They have introduced a new tax. We are not a tax expert, we have a tax expert. But I read that they've introduced a new tax bill that's going to change a whole lot of things, right? I'm more into the insolvency, white-collar crime area, right? With what has happened in the US, for instance, there will be obvious trade wars, right? And that would bring perhaps sanctions, tariffs. You need to look at some of the regulations around it. And you can't probably be doing private equity law or specialize in that area. And then because a client comes and asks you something, you try and wing it out. So I think for me, because the market, whether Nigeria or globally, would become increasingly diversified. There will be more activities, even in areas that you would typically not think of. The other day, the Supreme Court gave a decision that nullified the Nigerian the Lotteries Act. And when the team that in my firm that handles that looked into it, I mean, I thought, oh, it has to do with gambling and all that. But I didn't realize from what they did that even for corporates who would typically do promotions and adverts and would need to deal with the regulator, would now have big issues, because does it mean that you have to now start going through the 36 stages of federation, given the fact that it's a residual matter? So, I mean, obviously, me being an antiquated litigation lawyer would not have had the expertise to start looking into it. I mean, if you come here, I tell you I can look into it if I were that sort of person, but you wouldn't be able to look into it with that level of depth and expertise than somebody who does that a number of times. So I think Nigerian law firms, should think deeply about the practice of doing everything simply because a client came to you. If you know you don't have the expertise to do that, perhaps you can think about a referral network. Or if you are a law firm that is ambitious, then you have to think about, especially at the owner's level, thinking about bringing in more senior persons on board, bringing in more experts on board, and sharing the pie so that you'll be able to grow a truly deserving practice that you will be proud of. So that's what I think about it.
Thank you, Amala. I like the bit of sharing the pie. I know that's not really need
you don't get to see that.
to yourself. Thank you very much to our wonderful, knowledgeable student panelists. I think it's been a very interesting conversation. We will take questions now. I think we can give this vote of thanks and contributions as well, because I know some.
Let's allow him.
Yeah. Apologies for coming in.
No.
Yeah, I think my contribution was just, when I came in, we were talking about legal tech and privacy and all of that, and developing precedents, in-house precedents for transaction work that could then abridge the time spent on transactions. But I think my input is, in Nigerian climate, sometimes, impacts on, as much as possible, as much as you possibly want to achieve that objective. But I think the Nigerian climate, where you have clients that you have to handle, are not as savvy as you would have in Western jurisdictions, also impacts of that. You have transactions, well, the transaction very recent, and we had a long-running debate just because a word was used first and then it was defined as something else. And then the client sees, or the counterpart sees that defines them elsewhere and saying, what is this? Why are you referring to this? And we say, it's defined as this. It's the same thing we are all agreed on. I say, but that's what we agreed on. Use that exact same thing everywhere else in the document. So it's something as simple as that. So if you have your own in-house template, clients may already be used to seeing things in a different way. And you then have to go through a process of, teaching or educating them on the fact that the way you've presented it, right, may work for you, may actually be the same as the other thing, but you then have to bring them to that point where they see your template as being the same as what is in the practical law template, or it's in the Linklaters template, or the Dipo template, which they have seen and they also have been used to. For the infrastructure and construction industry, they went through a whole process of getting to that point, of developing the FIDIC contracts, FIDIC templates, and to do that, they had to aggregate, people from all the major firms to agree, and many people in the construction industry to agree on a template and how best to frame certain words, that's will work for everybody. In more M&A type practice, everybody has a template. If you go to Dipo Chance, they have a template. Go to Linklaters, they have a template. Whether Wednesday will have a template. DNS will have a template for the exact same SPA, right? SPA type or M&A type transaction. So there's no problem with developing an in-house template. My contribution would just be that you will still see yourself spending a whole lot of time trying to educate your client or educate the counterpart on a transaction to see that template as, deserving or being worthy of the purpose for which it is being used. I think that's just fine.
Thank you, Innocent. Do you have any questions or comments?
Okay, I want to say, my name is Moyo.
Hi, Moyo.
When we are now looking to Esther website, he said that's in China.
Yeah.
Actually, I've been for over a year. I've been working and I'm surprised that sometimes they're not even bothered about what we are bothered about. And I think maybe it's because they've been like us once and they know what it takes to be. So sometimes when we are talking about how we can mitigate the effects of foreign capital, they are not even bothered. And so, but I will stay to themselves back there. And I'm looking to joint ventures in areas of manufacturing, mining, and so I think we should cast the net to those areas because they are very willing to do business.
I mean, are you talking from a practice or?
Yes, from practice, advisory, and all these aspects.
That's interesting. I would like to perhaps maybe later understand your experience in terms of dealing with them. I'm usually traumatized.
What they are
No.
what they are bothered about is when a dispute happens, how do you resolve it?
No, of course.
That's their main question. I think even because I'm always surprised the extent they're able prepared for disputes.
Yeah.
But what they just want to know that okay, even if we get judgment, how fast can we execute the judgment? That's what they are bothered. They are not really bothered with that. I don't know how they do their analysis, but another thing is they believe so much in data. The figures are there, the numbers are there, they are willing to do the business.
Yeah, and I think, just off what you mentioned, because you mentioned mining and stuff like that, I think in terms of whether it's corporate, right, in terms of expanding to new businesses or law firms, for instance, it would be to look more into, so say you're a law firm, into countries that are more interested in imports on their side, and that would be exports in Nigeria. So issues related to mining, or when you are looking at perhaps prospecting for clients and you are more interested in cross-border work, it would be because some of the challenges that we've seen in trying to prospect for clients would be that when you go, you preach the Nigerian gospel, say, oh, it's so nice, and then the big elephant in the room, which is the FX issue, comes in, and then you guys have an honest conversation and then realize that these guys can't do proper FDIs. But if one perhaps then focuses on certain industries that are export-oriented in terms of Nigeria, and things like mining, things like agribusiness, for instance, especially when it has to do with raw materials, the traditional oil and gas is out of it, right? But there are some of these areas, obviously there are other sectors that are quite resilient to some of the shock that we're experiencing. Quite interesting, to be honest, I'm not a tech person, but fintech, quite resilient. Maybe because it's something that is tied to population. I know you are smiling. You might have a different, but that's what I'm.
It's raising dollars and any naira revenues are reporting lost.
But the reality there is that there are some industries that appear to, be a bit resilient to what is going on. And so to your point, and which I think is a very valid point, we probably may have to look at some of those sectors and then tie it to countries that China obviously is very, very ambitious. And I think it's even with the current situation that we have with the US, for instance, it will make them become more and more ambitious. I think they will look now very closely. Remember that when Trump was there, they looked closely to Africa because they needed to have an ally. And they thought that because obviously Africa, we needed funding. So the easiest way to penetrate that was to provide funding. And I think that will happen. And I think some of the patriarch states, things like Iran, Russia, will also look more closely to places like Africa, and one, insofar as you're able to avoid some of the sanction-related headaches that will come with it, maybe there are places that we will have to do that.
Happy for you to speak with understanding.
Okay, so I think at this point, we have to thank everybody for coming. I was hoping I'll be able to use the mic.
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry, I just like to do the mic. So at this point, I think the speakers and the moderators have done thorough justice to the topic. I mean, in the beginning, everything that was being said was leading to the point that diagram may actually study next year. There was reference to shale oil coming on stream with Donald Trump, as well as possible resolution of the wars on the Middle East, which is tending toward the fact that oil prices are. Aside from that, I really enjoyed and learned from everybody on the table. Thank you, Tolulope, for moderating the session. I also want to thank Jennifer. Jennifer has been one of our most supportive alumni. Dipo, although not an alumni, I also especially thank and Chioma. Thank you. And of course, our hosts who have put together a very wonderful program. I can see the media people, the media team. And there are gifts for everybody outside, as well as a cocktail type event happening after this event. And of course, alumni, non-alumni that joined both physically and virtually. We thank you. We most especially thank people that came physically despite the traffic and everything going on. Thank you very much. I don't know if the hosts want to say one or two things.
It's not my body, so maybe I should thank my firm for agreeing to think out the budget. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I thought it was a very insightful. You never can say what you learned from these things, and it widens your perspective. So I thank our guy.
Thank you, BC, for coordinating.
And I thank the moderator and then the speakers for such an interesting discussion. I think if you can join us outside, and then let's try and wind down a bit before we go. Thank you once again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.